Have a pleasant day, everyone. My report is Unbalanced Growth, the Counterrevolution in Development, and Crisis in Keynesian Economics. First is the unbalanced growth. My objectives are discuss the concept of Hirschman unbalance theory and define and discuss the social overhead capital and directly productive activities. This recommended approach, formulated by Albert Hirschman. Albert Hirschman was an economist and author of political economy and political ideology. He emphasized the unbalanced growth. According to Hirschman, that development is a chain of disequilibria that must be kept alive rather than eliminate the disequilibrium, of which profits and losses are symptoms in a competitive economy. This equilibria or the disequilibrium is a loss of lack of balance or stability, especially in the relation of supply and demands. Hirschman, together with Rostow, Fleming, and Singer, propounded the theory of unbalanced growth as a strategy of development to be used by the underdeveloped countries. Hirschman attacked the balanced growth that problems of industrialization did not require a simultaneous solution as claimed by the Rosenstein, Rodan, and Ragnar Norsk. Hirschman theory stresses on the need of investment in strategic sectors of the economy instead of all the sectors simultaneously. In his view, the fundamental problem of the development of the consists in generating and channeling human energies. Hirschman found the big push theory to be unrealistic, that is relied on resources like investment capital that is endemically in short supply in poor countries. The greatest shortage in poor countries was entrepreneurship or the ability to perceive opportunities and make investment decisions. The notion of unbalanced growth was based on creating situations where people forced to make investment decisions by deliberately unbalancing different sectors of the economy. If certain parts of the economy are made to grow by state investment, for instance, it perceives shortage in other sectors that will draw out investment to stimulate growth. According to Professor Hirschman, that the strategy for underdeveloped countries should not invest in all sectors and industry. Instead of investment should be made in strategic and leading sectors only. This is because underdeveloped countries suffered by the lack of resources and infrastructure. The strategy of unbalanced growth should be adopted by two reasons. First is the external economies. Hirschman unbalanced growth generates externalities, so we could say that growth of industry A stimulates the growth of industry B, and the growth of industry B stimulates the growth of industry C. So external economies provides benefits to the industry such as decline in marginal cost and cost of raw material, better transportation resulting from expansion of industry over time. Apparently, external economies provides benefits to itself and also it provides benefits to the other industry. The second one is the complementarities. It is the growth of output of industry. It is the growth of output in industry A that may lead to increase the demand of industry B and C, and it may also reduce the marginal cost of the industry or firm. There are two types of investment we there are two types of investment. We have convergent and divergent. If projects which withdraw more external economies, then they can create it is called the convergent series of investment. This type of investment are made by private enterprises who were influenced by profitable motive. Profitable profit motive. This type of investment is it directly productive activities or the DPA. DPA or the directly productive activities includes those investments which lead to direct increase in the supply of goods and services. Investment in agriculture are example of DPA. The second one is the divergent series of investment. If the project withdraw less external economies than they can create is called the divergent series of investment. This type of investment undertaken by the government agencies who are influenced by social profitability or the social welfare. This is made by the social overhead capital or the SOC. SOC or the social overhead capital are those basic services of the economy without which the economy cannot function. Investment in healthcare, education, power, transport are example of a social overhead capital. This is the theory of unbalanced growth. So we have to choose which part should we go for it. If we go for the unbalanced social overhead capital, that is the social overhead capital, or we should go for an unbalanced with DPA, that is directly productive activities. Because investment in SOC and DPA cannot taken simultaneously in less developed countries because of the lack of resources of the developed and the underdeveloped countries. So initially, such countries concentrate on either of these two. Hirschman suggested that the growth of economy into two ways. First is the unbalancing the economy through SOC. SOC or the social overhead capital is the basic services of the economy according to Hirschman. Growth of SOC which stimulates investment in directly productive activities. For example, the development of irrigation is expected to stimulate the growth of agricultural works. That is the example of the sequence of investment from SOC or the social overhead capital to DPA. It is known as pressure relieving investment or development via excess capital a capacity of SOC or the social overhead capital. Next is the unbalancing with directly productive activities. Investment with DPA will cause investment in SOC demand for irrigation, road transport, and communication will increase, causing greater investment in these activities. The sequence of this investment from SOC to DPA, it is known as pressure creating investment or development via shortage of SOC. So next is the counter-revolution in development economics. Our objectives is first define what is counter-revolution in development economics, discuss the criticization of Johnson and the Keynesian economics. Third is explain the hard growth model or the Harud-Domar growth model and Bauer critique in development economics. Counter-revolution development theory is from classical and neoclassical economics that was opposed to the Keynesian, the social democracy, the state intervention, and the structuralism. Harry Gordon Johnson was a Canadian economist who studied international trade and international finance. Johnson criticized condition economics. He thought that intellectual movement in economics responded to the perceived social needs rather than arising from an autonomous, purely scientific dynamic. Johnson found that condition Johnson found that conclusion that capitalism tend to systematically produce a massive economic problems such as stagnation and unemployment to be unjustifiably critical of the entire capitalism, the stagnation and the unemployment. Keynesian economic is a macroeconomic theory of total spending in the economy and its effects on the output, the employment and inflation base of Keynes' theory increase government expenditures and lower taxes to stimulate demand and pull the global economy out of the depression. But for Johnson, development economist has a mistake in adopting industrialization and national self-sufficiency that led to unproductive industrial investment in developing countries, especially those of the post-independence country in post-independence African countries. It encouraged the corruption, favored substitution, and in general it made for misguided state intervention into economics life to achieve social justice. Johnson said that the problems of the developing countries are not from the legacy of colonial history, nor from global inequalities, but instead from misguided Keynesian development policies. Later, Johnson extended this critique, Harud-Domar's model, concentration on fixed capital investment as the prime economic mover. This is the Harud-Domar growth model. It explains growth in terms of the level of saving and productivity of capital. This model stresses the importance of the savings and investment. The formula is rate of economic growth equals the level of savings divided by the capital output ratio. And a more extended critique came from the British economist Peter Thomas Bauer. He was a development economist and best remembered for his opposition to the widely held notion that the most effective manner to help developing countries is advanced through state-controlled foreign aid. Bauer said that development economics was not merely wrong, it was intellectually corrupt, meaning his views taken by obvious empirical evidence, like the thesis of the vicious circle of poverty, the allegation that rich countries have caused the poverty of the poor countries, the allegation of a secular decline in the terms of trade of poor countries, the insistence on the supposed necessity of central planning and a foreign aid for the material advancement of poor countries, and also the opinion that all men are equally gifted by nature and have equally economic aptitudes. Small number of economic theorists who were opposed to the market system exercised unwarranted influence on Western people filled with guilt about the developing countries. Bauer thought that government India is the prime example that should stop suppressing the energies of their subjects. Reducing poverty in the third world did not require a large scale capital formation, even in investment in human capital. In fact, foreign capital aid and technical assistance might actually do great harm to developing countries. Bauer particularly insisted that non-totalitarian societies should refrain from allowing governmental participation in the economy. The counter-revolution was usefully extended by Deepak Lal, an economist in the Third World, argued that the death of development economics would promote the health of the developing countries to promote the health of the developing countries. Lal embraced the idea of mono-economics, a theory of economics equally applicable to all countries, and also Lal argued against redistributing income from rich to poor people, and he was against in all economic control and for liberalizing financial and trade controls in advocating a return to nearly free trade regimes. By the mid 1980s, the whole notion of development economics has been discredited, at least in conventional circles. This was merely one small part of a sea-level change in economic by a crisis in Keynesian economics and a concurrent revival of the liberal economics of the 19th century that is called neoliberalism. Next is the crisis in Keynesian economics. The objectives are discuss and explain the 1970s stagflation, explain how Keynesianism abandoned. Inflation and unemployment were based on the conditions school of economic thought with the growth in the money supply can increase employment and promote economic growth. In 1970, Keynesian economists had to reconsider their ideas as industrialized countries around the globe entered into a period of stagflation. Stagflation is defined as slow economic growth occurring simultaneously with high rates of inflation. In 1970, in 1970 economy, when people think of the US economy, here are the things that will come up on their mind. First is the high oil prices, the inflation, the unemployment, and fourth is the recession. A recession is a macroeconomic term that refers to a significant decline in general economic activity in in a designated region. 1970 was an era of rising prices and rising unemployment. This period of poor economic growth could all be explained as the result of the cost push inflation of big oil prices that is rampant at the time of petroleum exporting countries or the OPEC. It is doubled and redoubled crude oil prices in 1973. The economic crisis in 1970 was actually solved because, according to Keynesian economic theories, at the time, inflation should have an inverse relationship with unemployment and, and a positive relationship with economic growth. Rising oil prices should have contributed to economic growth. Stagflation is difficult for Keynes policies to deal with. Crises can be interpreted in several ways. Milton Friedman believed that there were fundamental structural deficiencies in Keynesian economics and economic policy. This persuasion was made possible by massive changes in political thinking. The right wing and even centrists of the elite blame all this radicalism on a soft-hearted Keynesianism, manifested in an incipient nanny-state or state that coddled its citizens despite their protestation as they were children. They wanted to re-establish law and order and revert to a more conservative political economic regime. In 1996, Sturgeon termed military Keynesianism when economics have been boosted by military spending like the Gulf War and the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, or we might say popular Keynesianism. The Bush administration in 2008, putting the internal putting the Internal Revenue Service into send checks to every family in the United States. So it is true that the economic crisis of the 1970s resulted from real problems in the global capitalist system. But the notion that social Keynesianism, who was at fault and should be abandoned, was only one of several interpretations that could have been made. For example, the economic crisis of the 1970s could far more plausibly be explained as resulting from imperialism, the overstretching of US political, military, and economic might during the Vietnam War. Whatever the fact, the new liberals won the interpretive debate. Keynesianism retreated, social democracy were ruined, and New Deal liberalism became a term of duration. We move now to the economic theorists who made that fatal interpretation that has led to the era of the neoliberal dominance since the early 1980s. That would be all. Thank you.